I've been saying it over and over for months on the air, in my column, on my podcast. And now even the New York Times is recognizing this reality. Joe Biden doesn't spend nearly enough time talking to journalists. Not because we're sweet and lovable, but because that's how you communicate with the country. He has the most powerful megaphone in America, and he turns the volume way down. Biden doesn't drive the news agenda, in marked contrast to Donald Trump, who dominated the news and denounced those who delivered it. As the Times puts it, Biden has allowed his opponents too much room to set the terms of debate. In his first 9 months, Biden granted about a dozen interviews to major TV and print outlets. Trump did more than 50 in the same period, Barack Obama more than 100. And now we get to the paper's real gripe about Biden. He has not sat for interviews with the Associated Press, the New York Times, Reuters, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, or USA Today. How dare he? He hasn't even chatted with friendly comedian Stephen Colbert, and of course, not with Fox either. And Biden doesn't stir things up on his bland and boring Twitter feed. The conventional wisdom is that his aides don't want the boss wandering off script or making mistakes. Now, whether that's true or not, Biden's low-key approach often renders him a bystander in the national debate. And you know what? Dealing with the press is part of the job. I'm Howard Kurtz, and this is Media Buzz. Ahead, Kyle Rittenhouse rips the media's sickening coverage of his trial and meets with Trump. We'll talk to Brian Kilmeade about that. And ABC's Jonathan Karl on his interviews with Trump about the last year of his presidency. As the media complaints mount, Jen Psaki says President Biden takes more questions than his recent predecessors, just not in press conference form. Here are some of the brief exchanges the president has had with reporters, or not, in the last couple of weeks.
You ask me that all the time, and I give you the same answer. I've been confident since the day I stepped in office.
Mr. President, what happens next on Taiwan? You said you talked to President Xi about it, but it's clear that there's a lot of tension on both sides.
Nothing happened.
The Build Back Better plan, now that it's passed the House, when do you expect it to land on your desk?
Well, I don't know. It's going to take a while to get through the Senate. I think it'll probably be after Thanksgiving.
Guarantee gas prices go down?
Your meeting with Xi Jinping and other leaders. When will you answer our questions?
Joining us now to analyze the coverage, Ben Domenech, founder and publisher of The Federalist, and Mara Liasson, NPR's national political reporter. Both are Fox News contributors. Ben, do you agree that President Biden is too insulated from the press and that this surrenders his ability to sell his message?
I absolutely agree, Howie, and I think that one of the things that has really hurt the Democratic efforts in terms of righting the ship on the poll numbers that we've all seen to this point is the fact that Joe Biden seems to be very much AWOL, that the common image that people have of him at this moment is walking away from a podium, turning his back on reporters and taking no questions. And while we don't need to see the level of activity and engagement with the news media that we saw under the last administration, which was, combative and nonstop, and I think wore a lot of people out, I think Biden really is hurting not just his own poll numbers, but those of his party when it comes to making the case to the American people that things are on the right track, that things are coming back. You're not going to be able to get that with just a brief phone call to Al Roker at the Thanksgiving Day parade.
Mara, I've been pounding this drum for a long time, and I know some people think this is press whining, but I'm seeing a lot of stories that Biden needs to talk more about inflation. Biden needs to talk more about X, say Democrats and media critics. But to me, the president is muting his microphone. Do you think there's something to the notion that the top people in the White House don't want him out there that much?
Yeah, I think that the reason for Biden to speak to the press more is not because we want him to talk to us more. It's because the bully pulpit is this incredibly powerful tool. And I can tell you that there are a lot of Democrats that feel it's being underutilized. There's a message that hasn't gotten out, they feel, about the president's agenda, about Build Back Better, about the infrastructure bill, about all these things that they say are really popular with the public, but no one knows that they actually happened or that the $1,400 check they got came courtesy of Joe Biden. So yes, there's a sense that it's being underutilized. I don't get the sense that they are keeping him under wraps because they're afraid that he's going to make one of his well-known gaffes. He does interact with the press in an informal way, as you saw on the tarmac, and there's plenty of of opportunities for him to make mistakes there too.
Right.
But he's leaving a big tool unused.
But those interactions tend to be really brief.
Yes,
a few
really
questions.
brief.
And I would argue, even if he does make mistakes, and all presidents make mistakes, that's a small price to pay to get the message out. So, Ben, when Biden does talk to reporters or gives daytime speeches about infrastructure, it tends to be kind of on the dull side. And I say that not because it's a president's job to entertain us. Nobody ever thought Joe Biden was a great orator, but because what breaks through the media static is saying something sharp or provocative or taking someone on.
Yeah, and I think that that's something that's really been absent from this White House. You don't have the president using the power that Mara was just detailing to make the case for his agenda or even to claim credit for some of the things that they've been able to get accomplished on Capitol Hill to a stronger degree. I think that many Democrats are very frustrated by that because, they viewed Joe Biden as being this popular politician who was going to be the vehicle for an agenda that includes a lot of things that were to the old Joe Biden's left. And I think that what they want is for him to be making a stronger case for that agenda. This isn't just media frustration. It's political elites in the Democratic Party who really feel like this is a missed moment, a missed opportunity, and that, 11 months into the Biden administration, they see all these upside down poll numbers on virtually every major issue, and they wish that he was doing a better job of fighting to make the case for their agenda.
Yeah, and that's the key point. It's not just media frustration. Classic example, on Friday in Nantucket, the president had finished lunch and he stopped to take a few questions about this virus variant showing up in a number of African countries and elsewhere. And he says, well, there's a lot we don't know. And rather than having a big press avail to tout the fact that he took this action in banning travel from 8 of those African countries, he didn't do that, and he made limited news.
Yeah, he made limited news. There are a lot of opportunities that Democrats and supporters of his feel that he's just abandoned. Explaining his policies, getting out there to make sure people know what he's passed, what he's done.
Yeah, the polls show that a lot of people don't quite know what's in this
They have no idea.
bill.
Yeah, well, they not only don't know what's in the bill, they don't even know that the things he's already done and given them, like $300 per month per child tax credit or $1,400 check from the COVID stimulus bill, they don't know that they came courtesy of him. Look, one of Biden's promises was to dial down the volume, to have a calmer, less chaotic presidency.
Return to normalcy.
Yes, return to normalcy. He's accomplished that.
Yeah.
But the presidency is a selling position. Now, Donald Trump sold every day, for better or for worse, for him. It didn't always work out to his benefit. But Biden seems to have gone to the opposite extreme.
Well, you set up my next question, and Ben, you said earlier that the hostility between Trump and the press kind of wore a lot of people out. So for those who may have forgotten that, here is Donald Trump beating up on fake news just the other night with Sean Hannity.
I'd have some people in, I'd give them absolutely perfect answer, I'd give them the time, I'd give them everything, and they'd still write a bad story because that's their genetic makeup. They are the enemy of the people. And we could have a country that would be able to heal and get together, except the media foments it. They're so corrupt.
Ben, I always felt that phrases like enemy of the people went too far. But of course, since the media love to talk about themselves, that would generate days of coverage and sort of keep him in the news. But why do this now as a former president? Why pound away to that extent against the press?
Well, one thing that I would point out is that when we talk about the media, we typically mean the type of publications that you were listing off before. But the most powerful media companies in the world, not just in America, are Google, Facebook, and these big tech companies that I think very much have shown, if they're not the enemy of the American people, they're the enemy of free thought in America and the free expression of those thoughts on their platforms. But setting that aside, I do think that there's something to be said for the point that Mara was making about this being a dialed-down administration. I actually think that many people feel that this administration has presided over a lot more chaos than they expected, that they thought that the COVID measures would be more effective in shutting down the virus. Certainly the scenes from Afghanistan and from the border have played out as being chaotic scenes. And part of the trouble that I think is happening here for Democrats and for Joe Biden is that his absence allows that chaos to just exist and give the impression that he's not actually in charge of the country, or that he's not actually running things from the White House to the degree that I think everyone should want when it comes to the President of the United States, and have that confidence that he's in control and that this is not an administration that is effectively being run by underlings who may not be qualified to do their job. You saw the whole thing play out with Pete Buttigieg and the supply chain issues, for instance. The feeling that people are not have a steady hand on the wheel is one that I think all Americans, not just Republicans, not just critics of the administration, should want to have in any president and commander-in-chief.
Hey, Pete Buttigieg is on television more than Joe Biden and Kamala Harris combined in terms of interviews, and he's the transportation secretary. I agree with your point about big tech, and Trump is a big critic of big tech and has a lawsuit in every court. Remember, he's still banned from Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and so forth. But Mara, what the media say in response to what we just saw is that Trump continues to say things that aren't true about the election, rigged election, and so forth. And he certainly wasn't shy about insulting journalists personally, but at least reporters had a chance to challenge him virtually every day, sometimes several times a day. And then, of course, he would be at the center of those stories.
Yeah, look, Donald Trump's theory of the president was media domination. That's what he felt like. If you're not on TV, you're not alive. I mean, that was his theory of the case. Joe Biden has a completely different theory of the case. I think that somewhere in the middle would probably be more effective. In terms of the competence, though, well, actually, what Ben was talking about was about competence, not communication. In other words, I don't know if talking to the press more would have made Afghanistan, the chaotic retreat from Afghanistan, look any less chaotic. But having a strong presence and having an image that you build for yourself as a president by being out there and communicating with people could help overcome those bumps.
Yeah, but when it comes to something like COVID, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, you want to project a sense that you were in charge. No president can be a superhero when it comes to this, but you want to project that kind of image. Let me get a break here ahead. Brian Kilmeade on Kyle Rittenhouse speaking out after his acquittal. But when we come back, President Biden says he's running again, and much of the press not convinced.
He has to say that he's running for re-election, whether he wants to or not.
Democrats are worried, biting their nails, bracing for a blowout in the midterms a year from now, many sounding the alarm about 2024. I would just say a little perspective is worthwhile here. A lot can happen in 3 years.
Can you envision an effort to replace him at the top of the ticket?
Not if he wants to run for re-election, no. I think that's what sitting presidents get to make that decision.
Ben, that's just the flavor of the fact that many in the media are openly now talking about whether, in fact, President Biden will run again at the age of 82 when we get around to 2024. Now, it's absurdly early to be talking about this, but is the media skepticism and the political skepticism about this newsworthy?
Well, the fact that it's absurdly early is itself newsworthy. I mean, I think that many people anticipated we would be having this conversation as Joe Biden got older and as he approached the point where serious decisions needed to be made. I don't think that a lot of people thought that we would be having these conversations before the end of his first year as president, which itself tells you that a lot of Democratic strategists and a lot of experts internally are sounding alarm bells about what they see as being a real risk factor for him running for re-election. Now, the talk of Kamala Harris and Pete Buttigieg being on a ticket together in 2024, that also strikes me as absurdly early. But I think there is an awareness that they're probably going to have to crowd some potential competitors out of any kind of primary that plays out in a competitive fashion. And they're trying, I think, to get ahead of this story before it starts to take on a life of its own within the coalition.
Right. Mara, I don't think Joe Biden actually knows whether he's going to run again. It will depend on a combination of his political health and his medical health. But even if he privately harbors doubts, wouldn't it be political malpractice to say so?
Of course. That's why he's saying he's running. Look, we have this really interesting situation where in both parties, the people who are guaranteed to have the nomination if they want it, Joe Biden and Donald Trump, there's a lot of doubt about whether they actually will run. Joe Biden, of course, the oldest sitting president, there's obvious reasons to wonder if he wants to run again. Same thing with Donald Trump. Does he want to run and lose again? We don't know. And so that's why this chatter is happening, and also because his numbers have dropped. And because he has a vice president who's historically pretty unpopular.
Whose approval rating is even lower.
Worse.
A lot of people think she unfairly gets bad press.
She does. But the point is, it is what it is.
She partially does, and partially she can be politically clumsy.
Of course.
Yeah.
But look, I always say there's too many hours to fill with stuff to talk about. And you got to talk about something. And this is a worry in the Democratic Party, not just whether or not he'll run again, but people are worried that he's the only person who could beat Donald Trump.
Well, on that point, so we go to the Republican side, Ben, and, Trump has given every indication he'll run. In fact, his team leaked to Politico a memo about a poll, not the poll itself, showing him ahead of Biden in 5 key states. But is the press any more certain that even though Donald Trump could absolutely easily win the Republican nomination, that he will do this at the age of 78?
I don't think there's any certainty there, but I think that that's something that Trump actually enjoys. I think he enjoys being in the conversation and playing this game of will he or won't he. I think that level of enjoyment doesn't exist on the Democratic side because they have so many different risk factors involved, particularly given how much further left their agenda has turned out to be than I think a lot of people expected under Joe Biden, and whether there's going to be someone potentially in 2024 who comes along and mounts a presidential primary challenge or either to Biden or to Kamala Harris or the like if they feel like they're unpopular enough that they can take them on. That to me is going to be a really interesting conversation to have a year from now after the midterms when we are going to be, I think, in a very different political landscape for both men.
Yeah, I think there's a kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy to it, which is if Biden hadn't dropped by 15 points since the summer, I don't think there'd be quite as much of this chatter. But the chatter itself, I think, reinforces the notion that Biden is politically weak, at least. And then, of course, there are questions about a guy who would be 82. We've never had a president that old. So just to wrap this up, Mara, you talked about what does it say about political journalists that there is as much airtime being filled and column inches being filled about an election 3 years away?
Yeah, I think it's too bad. There's sometimes a lot more heat than light, and it's great to speculate about stuff like this. There's a lot of other things to cover.
But is the slog on Capitol Hill about the negotiations with Joe Manchin over the bill
just not as interesting as
just
whether
not as interesting?
Yes, just not as interesting, just not as click-worthy as to whether Joe Biden's going to run again or not, and whether Donald Trump will really run again or not.
Yeah, not that we make these decisions based on what people will actually watch, but of course there's a little bit of a bubble here inside the Beltway. Great conversation, Ben Domenech, Mara Liasson. Thanks very much for joining us. This growing list of nations on alert. Washington Post. As variant is detected around world, travel bans may be too late, experts say. But are the media rushing to judgment with very few facts? Joining us now, Mike Emanuel, Fox's chief Washington correspondent. And Mike, of course the media have to cover these developments. Sure. President Biden banning travel from the 8 African countries where the virus has surfaced, travel restrictions from Britain to Israel. But is the sheer volume of stories unnecessarily scaring people at a time when scientists just don't know much about Omicron?
I get a sense that a lot of folks around the country are saying, oh, here we go again. And they're wondering whether we're going to say you have to stay home. You can't spend the holidays with your family. Hanukkah starts tonight, right? Christmas is around the corner. So what's the government going to do next? And so I think a lot of folks are saying maybe you ought to just pump the brakes and figure out what you know about the new variant and then figure out how to deal with it, and also acknowledge how many people have been vaccinated. You've got antiviral pills coming from Merck and Pfizer soon. And so we're a lot better off than a lot of other countries around the world, and so maybe it's too early to push the panic button.
Yeah, this reminds me of the very early days of the pandemic when just a few cases in various countries would make news, but none of us thought it would turn into this global pandemic. And so you have some people at Fox saying, well, look, there's this South African doctor says the symptoms are very mild. That might turn out to be the case, or it might turn out like the Delta variant, which surged in late summer and completely doubled in some cases, average number of daily new cases here in America. The problem is we don't know, though it is a reminder that 40% roughly of Americans remain not fully vaccinated.
Absolutely. And I think we should give credit to the South African government for being fully transparent, saying we've got a problem and here's what we know about it. If China had done that in the beginning, then maybe we would have been in a little better shape or better prepared for what was to come. But yeah, I think there are lots and lots of Americans out there right now who are vaccine, rather COVID fatigued at this point, and they're glad they're vaccinated, but they're COVID fatigued at this point, and they're worried about what the next steps may be and how this could impact their daily lives once again.
Like, I'm already seeing pundits starting to debate, will there be new lockdowns? Will there be more mask mandates? And that hasn't been officially suggested, but Anthony Fauci on ABC this morning said it was too early to say. So part of me says, oh, here we go again. We're back into the political debate. Of course, ultimately, these are political decisions, and the media could be pumping this up. And again, this is going to look very different in a week or two, for better or for worse.
Yeah, well, we're absolutely going to get a lot more data when we get a better sense of what this Omicron variant's all about. When you hear mild symptoms from a South African expert, you hope that and pray that that continues to be the case. And perhaps, there have been other variants, and some of them have not made a huge impact. And so hopefully that will be the case with this one. But when you hear that it could be more contagious, obviously there's a lot of concern. And so the government's on it, and we're doing our best to present the best possible information, but there's plenty that we just don't know at this point.
Right, and journalists are, in fairness, including the caveats about this. For example, I talked about the New York Times headline, 5th paragraph of the story today, scientists caution relatively little is known about the new variant, and that only a small number of confirmed cases have surfaced globally. But when you put in that in the 4th or 5th paragraph, and yet people are seeing it every hour on the news, top of the front pages as they are today, they may hear, well, this must be a big deal because the media are all over it. And I think some people are going to start blaming the media for fear-mongering.
Yeah, well, you hear all these different mutations and whether the vaccine will actually protect and all this stuff. And so a lot of people are quite fearful because they've been through a year and a half of this, or nearly 2 years of this.
We're all sick of it. Clearly.
Yeah, so there's a whole lot of COVID fatigue at this point. And obviously people had the first holiday back with their families at Thanksgiving, want that to continue throughout the winter holidays as well. And so we're obviously watching and seeing what happens.
This is a tightrope act, and we have to report the facts as we know them, and we also have to be careful about not going too far, and we're pretty familiar with that dilemma by now. Mike Emanuel, always good to see you.
Thanks, Howie.
Next on MediaBuzz, Kyle Rittenhouse meets with Donald Trump and accuses the media of convicting him with falsehoods. Brian Kilmeade is on the case.